and welcome. Coming up tonight, why is a Labour government forcing 250,000 disabled people into poverty? I'll ask the Treasury Chief Secretary, Darren Jones. The Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stride, is an Olympic champion in criticising Reeves, but does he have even the outline of a credible economic plan? Anushka and Screeny have all the data on what the spring statement means for you.
Yes, I'll be digging into all the numbers and we'll try to work out if the Chancellor has done enough to avoid being in the same economic predicament again this autumn.
And sharing their views with all the frankness of the top-secret American chat on the Signal message app, we have the Lib Dems' Layla Moran, Reform's Yusuf and a former Labour Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell. Watcher, the world has become a much more unstable place with growing risks to our prosperity. So, said the Chancellor, she was right. She didn't, however, name the cause, Donald J. Trump and his tariffs. Clearly, she got the memo from Keir Starmer that Mr. Trump is never to be criticised for anything, even if he starts drowning kittens. But there is a contradiction between her analysis of the risks to economic growth and what she announced today. Let's be clear, her reductions in payments to the disabled will be painful to hundreds of thousands of vulnerable people. And the illusion has been shattered that this is mainly about helping the disabled to get jobs, given that she did a last-minute freeze of health-related universal credit payments after the OBR said the initial cuts wouldn't save enough money. Also, all public services, apart from defence and health, face a challenging squeeze to their resources. But although those cuts are serious for those directly affected, they are trivial in the context of the state and the economy as a whole. The point is they raised just over £14 billion to move the forecast deficit on Rachel Reeves' more important fiscal rule back to a paltry surplus of £9.9 billion. And as the OBR says, all it would take is another modest slowdown in growth or a small rise in expectations for future interest rates for that surplus to become a significant deficit. In Trump's world of chaos, only a moron would bet on the economy improving rather than deteriorating. So today what Reeves did was start 6 months of anticipation and anxiety that another Trumpian shock would force her to raise taxes in this autumn's budget. That in itself would hurt business and consumer confidence, as all that equivalent speculation did last summer and autumn. It makes one fear that Starmer and Reeves have never heard of the fiscal golden rule, which begins once bitten. Anushka.
Thank you, Robert. As you'd expect for a big fiscal event, we have mustered the best Peston geeks we can to give their verdict on the Chancellor's speech. But first, let's look at the problem that was facing Rachel Reeves today. Before now, she was down to £9.9 billion worth of headroom, the wriggle room to stay within her fiscal rules. It was already small, but the Office for Budget Responsibility wiped even that away today. And to just get back to where she was, she needed to find £14 billion or around that amount. So how? Let's have a look. The OBR listed it for us. So the top bit there, that is indirect effects, including good news, a growth benefit from the planning reforms. Tax in there, not the traditional ones, but visa charges, tax avoidance measures, and then the really painful stuff, £3.6 billion in cuts from some departments and £4.8 billion, those gross savings from welfare. So let's see where our experts stand on some of this. Jill Rutter is our Whitehall whisperer from the Institute for Government. On departmental cuts, she says they cannot be achieved at that scale from just back office reductions, meaning Darren has some very difficult decisions ahead. As for the biggest chunk, welfare, let's go to our spending expert, Emily Fry at the Resolution Foundation. She points out that they will push 250,000 families below the poverty line. Now, the government says that the government's own impact assessment that came up with that figure did not model the impact of people going back into the workforce. In fact, the government claim that something like 200,000 people on incapacity or disability benefits could work with enough support. The National Institute of Economic and Social Research have looked at what all of this means for the economy and for real disposable income across the population. This here is the pessimistic scenario where none of those 200,000 get into work. And this is the most optimistic scenario where every one of them gets a job. And what you can see is that even with the most optimistic scenario, where, as I say, all those people go back into the job market, it only just improves our living standards. In every other scenario, it is negative.
Thanks, Anushka. Well, let's immediately go to my political friends. I'm going to start with John McDonnell. John, look, we all know you hate the cuts that are being imposed to disability and incapacity support. How big... I mean, you're not at the moment a member of the Parliamentary Labour Party, but you obviously talk to a lot of MPs, Labour MPs. How big a rebellion do you think there'll be on this?
I wouldn't talk about rebellions because I think you've got a large number of new MPs who wouldn't want to vote against the government. But the problem is that...
How many Labour MPs will vote against?
I think quite a significant number. I think there will, but that's not the issue. I think the issue is about people feel pretty angry about how we've got into this situation, why these options are being chosen. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation today said, actually, it's not 250,000, it's 400,000. And then if you look into the detail of it, I chair an unpaid carers group. 150,000 carers will lose their carers allowance. These are people who look after their relatives and do it so well. 50,000 children, this isn't what the Labour Party is about. And so I think there is a demoralisation setting in. That's the worst thing you can have when you're at the beginning of a government, basically. So I think the general view is there's got to be a really serious discussion about between now and the budget about how we resolve this. And my own view is, as you know, there's a number of relatively marginal tax changes that could overcome this amount. You know, government spends, what, 1.2 trillion? And we're looking at 5 billion in terms of cuts to people with disabilities. It's the sort of, I know it sounds a lot, but actually for government spending, it's the money you could find behind the sofa if you looked at a number of marginal tax changes.
I'm going to ask Darren Jones, who's the Chief Secretary. His job is to look behind the sofa, so I'll ask him whether he has been looking hard enough in a minute or two. But Layla, I'm assuming the Lib Dems are going to vote against these changes. Is that right?
We have a lot of concern over a number of them. I mean, so I'm chair of the Health and Social Care Select Committee. And I went to Nottingham yesterday and met with a number of people who currently are on PIP and with the help of their private assistants are able to complete a degree. One's writing a crime novel currently. They are desperately trying to get into work. And they point out that the national insurance increases that happened at the budget, which were not reversed at this spring statement, mean that it's going to get harder and harder for them to be able to employ someone to help them to get into work. And a number of their friends who were there as well were saying that actually we've got to be really holistic about this. If you want to get people into work, everyone agrees with that. So, you know, on the principle that anyone who wants to be able to work should be able to work. On that, the Lib Dems are agreed. But our concern is that if you take away that support, if you stop those social care providers being able to provide that support, you're actually going to end up inadvertently removing people from the workforce rather than encouraging them to go into it.
Just to be clear, because you've obviously raised all your concerns about these cuts, you haven't actually answered the question whether the Lib Dems are going to vote against or not. Do you expect the Lib Dems to vote against these reforms?
Well, again, which ones specifically?
Well, specifically, the changes to the qualification rules for PIP and also specifically
PIP,
for the halving of the health-related benefits in universal credit.
Anything that will affect the most disabled in our society who desperately need that help, and anything that affects carers. I mean, bearing in mind...
So you're going to vote against? Just to be clear, you will vote against?
We had an entire election on Ed Davey making this his platform. Yes, we will be voting against this. OK,
that's very clear. Thank you. Yusuf, I don't know what reforms... You're chairman of Reform. I don't know what Reform's position is on these cuts to payments to the disabled. What is Reform's position?
Reform's position is that, of course, the most vulnerable in society do need to be protected. And you're right, we're talking about 5 billion here in the context of 1.2 trillion per year of government spending. But all of these things have to be paid for. The government is failing to grow the economy. This is the biggest catastrophe right now. The OBR once again halved their growth forecast. We have to get our economy growing again. Until we do that, we cannot pay for the doctors, the nurses, the carers. We can't pay for the most vulnerable in society.
So you would support these? I think you're saying you would support these cuts.
Here is what we need to do, Robert. Number one, we need to cut energy prices in this country. There is no example.
You're answering a
There is
different...
no
with all due
example.
respect, dear, you're answering a different question. Answer the actual question. Would you support these cuts or
Are
not?
you voting for them or against?
Let me answer the question.
Right.
The
long as you
reality is we can get bogged down in 5 billion over 1.2 trillion, or we can answer the real question, which focuses on the people watching this programme who know every time they go and do their weekly shop, it gets more expensive. Every time they open their electricity bill or their gas bill, it goes up. Until we solve those problems, all of these points are moot because all of these things have to be paid for. And we cannot pay for those things with energy prices where they are. There are no examples of economies in the world that are growing fast with energy prices where they are now. British people pay more for their electricity and their energy than any other country in the world, and that's why we have no growth.
I thought Reform was supposed to be taking a different approach to politics, which was answering questions, and you specifically didn't answer my question. Would you back these cuts or not? Yes or no?
We need to reduce government spending, but the most important thing is
Nobody knows is the answer. I think you've made your point about the bigger cuts and the bigger changes you want to see to growth. You didn't answer the question. I am delighted to be joined by Darren Jones, Chief Secretary to the Treasury. And so I'm now going to put to you a question that your colleague Liz Kendall wouldn't answer last week. And my assumption was that she was just waiting for the OBR to report. What I asked her last week was, given that she says that these reforms are in large part designed to encourage vulnerable disabled people back into work, so I asked her the question, how many people, over what time scale, how many vulnerable disabled people will be back in work as a result of these reforms? Can you answer that question today?
No.
Why not?
Well, because you can't take an average view of a large group of people who have, in their own individual circumstances, very different lived experiences. That's why that's not reflected in the impact assessment today. But what we do know...
But don't you understand why somebody like John is so concerned? Because if all people can see is the cut to living standards that's being imposed on these people, and you cannot say with confidence how many of them will be compensated in the form of getting paid work, people will think this is just all about heartless cuts.
So there's a couple of things that we should be careful with. One, we're increasing the standard rate of universal credit. That's going up from £96 a week to £106 a week.
But it's not enough to compensate those people for whom the health-related element is being halved and then frozen.
And for people who are on personal independent payments, no changes will be made to their payments until they've seen a clinician and had a clinical assessment about their needs. So we need to be really clear about that for people who might be affected at home.
But your impact assessment still said today that 250,000 people would be pushed into poverty.
Because the impact assessment can't accurately model the impact of support to help people get back into work, to access training and skills, to access healthcare services. It can't accurately model the impact of breakfast clubs or childcare and nursery spending or the child poverty strategy, which we've not announced yet, which will come later in the year. Why impose the cuts
before you've done... Because at some point you will be able to accurately model because you will begin to be able to process the data in a sophisticated way. Why not wait for a more confident view about the impact on employment before making the cuts?
Well, because the cuts will come in the future. These don't affect people's payments directly today, as I've just explained. And we'll have further details in the spending review in June about all of the other measures we're taking to support people who are in low-income or vulnerable work or who want to get back into work. But it's really important to recognise that the broader package of reforms that you spoke to Liz Kendall about last week is designed to make the system more effective for people, to give people the support they need. And if you do have severe disabilities and you can't work, you will be protected, you will be given support from the system, because that's what it's designed to do. We're committed to doing that. But equally, there are lots of people who are being failed by the system, especially lots of young people who the evidence shows that when they get onto universal credit, having come out of school, don't get access to training and skills or jobs. They get stuck on the universal credit system for a very long time. And we know that you can earn more and do better if you've got a job, not least because salaries are increasing quicker now than the price of our bills.
My only point is not that we wouldn't want more vulnerable people, disabled people who want to work back in paid employment. My only point is simply that announcing the cuts before we've got a clear route for them to get into employment looks as though all you're driven by is saving money.
Well, it had to be announced today because it requires an OBR forecast. The spending review in June does not have an OPR forecast attached to it. So you make a legitimate point. Unfortunately, it's just the way the OBR works with our economic forecast cycle. that we had to be able to produce those numbers for today. But we will set out the spending allocations for all of these different measures of support that I've just talked about in the spending review in June.
Now, there's one other aspect of this. We're going to move on to the broader economic points in a minute, but there's just one other aspect of this. You, and indeed the Chancellor also, have made an analogy between these vulnerable people who depend on this support for their livelihoods and your own children and pocket money. And, you know, it just felt pretty tactless to say this was the equivalent of taking a bit of pocket money away from your children who might get a Saturday job. Do you want to sort of basically address those people who feel a bit hurt by that?
Yeah, I'm sorry about it. It was tactless and it wasn't well considered. What I was trying to explain in simple terms was what the impact assessment considers and what it doesn't consider. The impact assessment considers how much money you lose by coming off of the social security system, but it doesn't consider how much money you gain by being back in work. I should have used a different set of words to explain it. I recognise that wasn't good enough and I apologise if I've offended people.
Now, that's a breath of fresh air, a minister admitting that they've got something wrong. Now, Anushka.
Thank you. The Chancellor is walking a tightrope because one of her own fiscal rules, the stability rule, is quite difficult. That rule is that there will be no budget deficit by the end of the period. So she basically wants to get below this line. And that tiny, tiny gap there represents the £9.9 billion she has left herself. You can see how tiny it is as a share of GDP. Now, today, the OBR created a range in their forecast of where she could land. Look at that beautiful fan. And they basically actually said she only has a 54% chance of being below the line, of hitting that fiscal rules. Now, as you can imagine, our experts have a lot to say about this. Simon French, our markets man, says that Reeves did a good job of avoiding a market event where everyone panics and sells off their bonds. But he has a fly in the ointment. Gilt yields, basically the cost of borrowing, only needs to go up by 0.6%. And then Rachel Reeves is back in the same place. Again, no wriggle room and potentially needing to raise taxes to stick to her rules. Who else can I show you? Businessman here, an economist, Mohammed El-Erian, has looked at trade for us. He actually highlights the OBR's concerns about Donald Trump and tariffs, and we can have a quick look at their numbers. They came up with 3 scenarios, and they are all bad for us in terms of GDP. The first scenario in blue is where we don't even get hit. But if China, Canada and Mexico face 20% tariffs, then it is bad news for us. We go down. In yellow, where we do also get hit, our GDP actually drops to below minus 0.6%. And if we all retaliate against the US, scenario 3, with an equivalent tariff, then we're in green. That is down at 1% hit to GDP in the next year. In other words, a year's worth of growth wiped away. So those are the worries about missing the fiscal rules. But the investment economist Mariana Mazzucato, she's worried about the rules themselves. She says the problem is not excessive day-to-day spending, but chronic underinvestment. And though there have been changes to the fiscal rules, she thinks they need to go further.
Gosh, well, lots to get our teeth into. I mean, let's just start with Mohammed El-Arian's concern about tariffs going up, which, if they were to go up, you would be in breach of your fiscal rules again, growth would slow down. We've got this deadline of April the 2nd. Negotiations are going on between the British government and the Washington administration about tariffs. How worried are you that we are going to face tariffs on April the 2nd?
Look, I'm going to be a bit boring, I'm afraid. As a government spokesperson, I'm not going to comment on hypotheticals. All I can say to you...
Well, the talks are going on, so you know that this is in play.
Yep, which is why all I can say to you is that my business and trade colleague, Johnny Reynolds, Secretary of State, is in discussion with American counterparts. We're in a good starting position. The UK has a surplus trading arrangement with the United States. We all know we have strong trade and security relationships. And we're currently in negotiations about how we can deepen and improve those relationships going forward.
Now, but Trump's made it clear he wants to impose tariffs, so we just can't be confident that's not going to happen.
Well, we have to wait and see where the negotiations finish and what we're able to conclude with the Americans.
Now, there's a ton of other stuff I need to ask you about, and in particular, I want to take you back to October when you raised a record-breaking £40 billion in extra taxes. It is pretty embarrassing just a few months later to have broken your fiscal rules, having raised all that money.
So we haven't broken our fiscal rules. We've met our fiscal rules. That's what the Office of Budget Responsibility should
it said you would have broken them
today.
unless you'd made the cuts that you've announced today.
And so we met our fiscal rules, as we've always said. They're
Yeah,
non-negotiable.
but to have to make additional cuts so soon is an embarrassment.
Well, if the world changes and then the cost of government debt goes up, there's nothing we can do about that. What we can do is make sure that we live within our means, and where we're able to make direct decisions, we live within our fiscal
But hang on a
rules.
second. Some of what's penalised you, what's hurt you, is lower growth this year, and some of that is actually due to the national insurance you imposed on employers.
Every major economy in the G7's had their growth downgraded for 2025-26.
Nobody has had their growth downgraded by the official forecaster by 50%. It's a swinging reduction.
You know, our official forecaster doesn't forecast other countries' economies, so it's
No,
kind
I
of a
wasn't
pointless
expecting them to
question.
forecast. I'm just saying, I'm just saying their forecasts have not fallen as much as that.
But
That's what I'm
the
saying.
forecast of the UK economy has actually increased growth from 2026-27 for every single year of this Parliament. And for the first time, which is big news in Wonkland, the Office of Budget Responsibility has actually looked at our policies on planning and house building and skills and said, do you know what? This is a credible plan, and we think the economy is going to grow as a consequence of the decisions this Labour government is taking. That's a good thing, but do we need to go further and faster? Absolutely we do.
Now, the other thing which Anushka pointed out, which if I were doing your job, I would be quite anxious about, is it said you only have a 54% chance of hitting your fiscal rule. Now, you're absolutely immersed in the moment in getting settlements with individual departments on the basis of a downgraded amount of money available for all of them from 26 to 30. But you must be terrified that you're going to be back negotiating with them on further cuts come the autumn.
So we're increasing spending in public services by a total of 70 billion over the course of this Parliament. So the money that's going into public services is going up. This is not an austerity situation where it went
I didn't say it was
down.
austerity, but you cannot deny that what she's announced today is less money from 26 to 30 for day-to-day spending, significantly less.
It's a little bit less than what was announced at the budget, but it's more than what they're currently spending now. So public service budgets are going up. And the reason that's important is because that's the rate of growth. You know, we still spend £1.2 trillion a year, and that's why it's right that we look at how we're spending every single pound of taxpayers' money. So I am very confident that we can set public sector budgets in June at the spending review that will be the foundation on which we will work over the coming years. Public services have to live within their means. People at home are paying lots of tax, and they're rightly saying, why are public services, basic public services, not working properly? And we've got to get a grip of that, which is what we're doing.
But with defence spending going up very significantly, with health spending continuing to go up very significantly, your colleagues in other departments, of course it's not austerity in the round, particularly given the enormous amount of money you're spending in the first year and a half of the government. But they are really, really worried that there will be very painful squeezes, whether it's justice or the Home Office, the assortment of so-called unprotected departments. This is your job to find the savings. It's tough, isn't it?
It's a tough job, yeah. But outside of defence, we've not actually made any decisions yet. We'll make those in the coming weeks and confirm them in June. And each department will get a different settlement depending on what they're doing and the size of the department, priorities that the Prime Minister set out in the plan for change. But overall, we are increasing spending on public services in a very difficult set of economic circumstances.
But individual services matter. Some services will end up with less, won't they?
I don't know yet. We haven't made those
But how is it
decisions.
mathematically possible for them not to end up with less?
Well, because what you're talking about is how much more money do I get more quickly, as opposed to how much of my current budget do I get to keep, and how do we deliver services more effectively so I can spend more of that money on the front line. We can't keep going around in this cycle of arguing about more money, more money, more money. We've got to look at how we spend our current money better. Taxpayers expect that, and that's what this government's going to be doing.
And I'm told you've only got time for a sort of one-word answer. Will taxes go up in the autumn?
I'm not going to prejudge any budget, but we're going to honour our commitment to working people as we set out in the manifesto.
Well, those are the manifesto. It doesn't mean taxes aren't going to go up, though, as we know.
I'll come back in the autumn.
OK, we'll hope you'll come back before then. It's always an absolute joy to see you. Thanks very much for joining us. John, what do you think as an old hand in this? Do you think taxes are going up in the autumn?
Yes, I think they do. I think it's inevitable. I think when you turn the fiscal rule into a fetish, you set yourself up to fail. What Rachel said today is the world has changed. It has changed, so you have to change with it. And that doesn't mean to say you tear up the fiscal rule. It means you explain that there are things that you have to do now that you maybe weren't planning to do originally. That's around taxation mainly. If you look at across Europe now, fiscal rules are being reimagined, if you like. They're being reinterpreted. Germany even changed its constitution to do it, to enable it to borrow more. And I think what you could do, even argue with, I think the markets would accept. The world has changed. The tariffs are going to hit us, no matter what, whether they're levied on us or just generally. And therefore, there'll have to be another transitional period before we get back to the tighter regime that we had before. And I think the markets would accept that. But in the meantime, the people who seem to be paying for this are the poorest and the disabled. That can't be right for a Labour government.
Layla, taxes as a share of the economy are rising still, and they're on a rising path because of the freezing of tax allowances to levels actually we haven't seen since the Second World War. And that is one reason why this government says it does not want to, if it can possibly help it, put taxes up more. What is your view, though? Do you think tax rises are inevitable?
Well, I understand the instinct. I mean, my postbag is full of people struggling, and they are in work, and they are struggling to make the childcare match their food bills, and it's just difficult out there. But there is an elephant in this room, which is the government deciding to completely not at all even consider a customs union with the European Union. You talk about Germany. They are in a different situation to us. Their GDP to debt ratio is better. And if you look at the longer-term hit of what's happened because of the botched Conservative deal, that has meant 4% of GDP on the bottom line. That's, you know, tens of billions of pounds that we could have access to, which would certainly feed into the OBR forecasts, that this government has basically said, absolutely not, we're not even discussing it. The world has changed. We should be having a different conversation.
Zia, you went into the election as a party promising really, or offering the electorate massive public spending cuts. You've seen how controversial it is for this government to cut welfare, to make relatively modest, some people would say, cuts to the public sector. Would you favour a sort of Elon Musk-style slash-and-burn approach to the public sector?
We definitely need to get British taxpayers far better value for the taxes that they are paying. So let's take the NHS, for example, something that's close to my heart. Both my parents have worked in the NHS, 50 years of service between them. 2 decades ago, the cost of the NHS per person in the UK was £2,000 a year. Now it's £3,000 a year. That's adjusted for inflation. Are we getting 50% better service? Well, the elective waiting lists in the NHS were 1 million people. 2 decades ago, it's now 7 million people. Tens of thousands of people waited last year, more than 3 days in accident and emergency. So we know there is a lot of money to be saved in terms of waste in the NHS. But Rob, here is the other key thing. Mainly diversity, equity and inclusion officers,
if this is a genuine
DEI
question,
officers.
I'm chair of the Health and Social Care Select Committee. Can you tell me where so I can look into it?
Number one, DEI officers.
Hang on, DEI
officers. What?
Yeah, no.
It's not that much money invested.
It's waste. Yeah. You asked the question. So number one, this waste. Number two, the NHS administrators who are paid hundreds of thousands of pounds a year, whose KPIs are appalling year after year after year.
Which
and if you talk to frontline NHS workers...
Which ones? Because there's the ICBs, there's the ones in the providers...
every single NHS administrator in the country, because wait lists keep going up, outcomes keep getting worse. So literally every single NHS administrator in the country.
There is huge reform that needs to happen in the NHS. I completely agree with that. And actually, I would argue the enabler to all of that is social care. Yeah, sure. But... can you please be specific about what exactly you're talking about? Because you're not.
Every single NHS administrator. Let me make one... Can I
You've got to be quick there, because we've got to go to a break, Zia.
Yeah, just very, very quickly. I go back to the original point. All of the things we're talking about right now, the most vulnerable in society needing to be protected, the NHS, frontline NHS workers, waiting lists, these things need to be paid for. Government, the cost of borrowing for the UK government is now at multi-year highs, very close to where it was under the peak of the Liz Truss government. We have to get the economy growing again. The only way we will do that is cutting waste and public spending and cutting taxes for British people.
There's tons for all of us to get our teeth into there. Now, sadly, we do have to go to a quick break. For those of you who don't know what DEI is, Zia was saying, speak up. That is the diversity, equity and inclusion programmes of all sorts of institutions, which is basically about encouraging equal opportunity for women and for people from ethnic minority backgrounds, different genders, different sexualities. Obviously, Donald Trump hates it, and Zia Yusuf thinks we're spending too much money on it as well. Now, don't go away. After the break, we'll be talking about a lot of this with the Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stride, and a ton of other related stuff. It's going to be exciting. Come back in a minute or two.
Oh, hello. Welcome to the break. Oh, you've changed. Darren's gone. Mel's here. Everyone can take part in the break. We have a very astonishing story from the United States where the journalist Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor of The Atlantic, was added to a group with very senior American government officials, leaders, vice president, who basically discussed war plans. Which leads me to ask, are you part of groups like these?
Come on, you're all members of WhatsApp.
Oh, yeah.
I will confess, I started the Lib Dem WhatsApp parliamentary chat.
Started
I
it?
started it back in the day.
How long ago?
I know, a long time ago. It was like an innovation at the time. But
And what do you do when you want to tell someone something secretly?
Well, you
Do you use
DM them.
WhatsApp?
You DM them, yeah. But you direct message them.
You don't. Do you use Signal? Is there a special Signal reform group?
There is.
Who's in it?
We generally use WhatsApp, but yeah, if you want to speak to somebody individually, you can reply privately.
You don't
yeah,
use
we
Signal?
discuss it. We don't generally, obviously we're not in government, we generally wouldn't discuss classified war plans, for example. That's probably not something that we would encourage
What
doing.
happened to Rupert Lowe? Was he in the group and is he now out?
We are. Look, we have a WhatsApp group between leadership in the party and MPs, and we use it to discuss the news of the day and our views on it.
Oh, let's look at that. What did you make of the leaks, John?
Extraordinary, but nothing about Trump surprises me ever. Really
The
doesn't.
thing about this is, like, these days, the etiquette is you send someone a notification to join your group. You don't just add them.
Yeah.
So that was the bit that I found, like, the weirdest of all.
Have we got the...
And this bit here, this is the reaction to the bombing of the Houthis. Do you use emojis?
Yeah.
Not like
What did
that.
you do? Did you do an emoji after the mini budget?
I don't think I did, actually, but it wouldn't be
could
a
you?
flaming, burning flame.
It wouldn't have been a
It
burning
was
flame.
burning the house.
Not a fist.
Yeah.
What about, you must have secret groups. Do you ever use Signal?
No.
I
Only
use
about
Signal.
to.
I use Signal with my...
Some MPs definitely
Yeah, I
contact me
use
on Signal.
Signal.
What is Signal?
Yeah.
I don't even know what it is.
So I started using Signal
What, it's
when...
like a WhatsApp version.
Yeah.
Our
I
Ukrainian
don't know what to say. I
counterparts...
don't know if he's being serious or
Our
not.
Ukrainian counterparts can't use Signal. So
Yeah.
when that war started, if I was to get in touch with my Ukrainian counterpart, and there are sister parties in Russia
What
as
else
well
do
who
you
are
use?
pro-democracy,
Yeah.
they use Signal.
All right.
But maybe there'll be another one soon. I think we're out of time. Bye.
Now, in a minute or two, I will be talking to the Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stride, a Tory view of what the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, announced today. But before that, this is the first time, Zia, that we've seen you since the sort of furore over Rupert Lowe, the whip being withdrawn and the investigation by a lawyer into his alleged bullying and harassment. One of the things that I was really struck by was some remarks that we've actually put it on the screen that Nigel Farage said, because he pointed out, and we've seen this, awful, some would say racist abuse of you for taking the action that you took against Rupert Lowe from Reform supporters. I just wondered how that must have been awful. How did that feel to you to receive that kind of abuse?
Well, look, you go into politics and going on the front line. It's a tough old game. You've got to have a thick skin. What matters is, look, this isn't about personalities. This is about professionalising the party. The independent KC published their report, as you know, this week, and the conclusions are quite decisive. So we are focused on fighting a brilliant campaign next month and doing really well on the 1st of May.
And I mean, so you've in a sense, got no personal regrets for taking this high-profile job, having now discovered that it comes with, as I say, the potential for people behaving in the most disgusting way towards you?
On the contrary, so, you know, when Nigel said he was going to come back to the front line of British politics, he fought to win his seat in Clacton. He won his seat in Clacton. We obviously won 4 million votes. We are now leading many national opinion polls. And the bookmakers have Nigel being favourite to be the next Prime Minister of the UK. So no regrets at all.
I mean, Rupert Lowe obviously has denied, you know, on the record that there was any bullying. He says what you're doing is smearing him. You pointed out that the KC said there was credible evidence. Some of your colleagues, I'm delighted that Mel Stride is with me, think you should invite Rupert Lowe to join your party. What do you think about that?
Well, ultimately, it's a matter for Kemi Badenoch to take those kind of decisions if that was something that he wanted to do. And we're not in that situation, so I don't know what the upshot of that may or may not be. I mean, look, if
But
we have
theoretically,
people,
you'd welcome
well,
it.
if we have people that adhere to our principles and want to support us and want us to win the next general election, then those things are a possibility. But as I say, this is a hypothetical question. I've no idea whether Mr. Lowe
even
wants
when
to
they
do that
face
or
the
not,
kind of
and
allegations
what the view would be
Yeah.
in those circumstances. But every case would have to be looked at individually. So I can't second guess it.
Mel, I want to talk to you about the story of the day in just a minute. And Anushka's going to share some information with us before we get on to that.
Yes, I am. Very quickly, this chart looks a little complicated, but stick with me. This is GDP growth across the bottom, and this is our debt problem, our spending on interest as a share of GDP. So really, where you want to be is where we very rarely are, is all the way down here. High growth, low debt, but we rarely are. This Parliament, in pink here, is pretty bad so far up here. But Mel, your government wasn't great either. It was around here. And you can't say that it was just to do with a global trend. If we look at debt as a share of GDP over the years since 2000, between us, the UK in blue and the EU in red, you can see we actually used to be well behind. But under the later years of the last Conservative government, we were out of sync, well ahead even before COVID hit.
So I just want to put to you the fundamental problem that Rachel Reeves faces, which is an interest bill rising to £120 billion, debt of 100% of GDP. And as Anushka has just pointed out, that explosion in debt, and to be clear, also the big rise in the interest bill, a lot of it to do, OBR says this, with your issuance of index-linked gilts. This problem, this is a Tory-created problem.
Well, actually, I can't actually see that graph, so I haven't got the right glasses to see it. But I think what it's probably showing is debt rising. And then 2010, of course, when we came into office, £1 in every 4 that we spent was being borrowed. We had a very high deficit.
What it shows,
I'll
tell you what it shows. It shows there is,
about
up until 2010, it shows that our debt is massively lower than the EU
without
debt.
my specs, I suspect that by about 2015, debt as a proportion of GDP is beginning to come down.
No, it's not.
And then
That's the whole point. It's
then
not.
We hit,
it continues
no, it does,
to rise, Mel.
We're that blue line.
Walk
It's
over
slightly
there and have a
coming
look at
down.
it, because put
It's
your
like-
proper
do you know-
glasses on, because I'm
Right.
telling you that's not what it shows,
Okay.
and it's not what
No,
happens.
there. Is that 2015 or thereabouts?
Yeah.
2015 is here.
So
we
that,
go
that
above
blue
the
line is
EU.
beginning to go down, is it not?
Hardly. It's
It is
basically
going,
flat.
no, it's
Flat
going
line.
down a little bit.
Oh, well, you'd need a microscope
It's
to see
going
that.
down, and I know it's going
Almost.
down. And then it goes up because of COVID.
We knew you were going to
And then it
blame
does come
COVID,
down
by the
again.
way.
But from
Before and
2015...
after COVID, you are,
Okay.
we, the UK,
Yeah.
is above the EU average.
Now, that's a different question. The question was about debt and what was happening to it as a percentage
No,
of GDP.
but-
It was coming down from about 2015 on our watch, OK?
I mean,
that's just a matter of fact.
It was,
But anyway,
it was
yeah.
would you
barely
nonetheless
coming down.
like to say sorry for what you did to the debt burden in the UK? Because it was
Well,
your
look,
fault.
no, I think there were two things. Well, first is, look, you get an increased debt if you have a positive deficit. When we came into office in 2010, we inherited a huge deficit of about £150 billion a year, OK, which was being added to the debt. We got that deficit down through time, which is why I think that line starts to come down at about 2015. Then we ran into COVID.
It hardly
and we
comes
spent
down at
about
all.
400
Honestly, Mel, it hardly comes down.
But it does come down. It does come down a bit.
But believe
It's
it or
not
not,
going up.
the European Union that many of your colleagues hate, it came down way faster in the European Union.
That's a different issue. But the point is, it was coming down. And then, why does it go up further with COVID? Because we spent £400 billion supporting the economy, and that gets added to the debt pile. And you see the European, I think, I can hazily see the European line going up at the same time that ours does. So those are the factors that are at play.
And
what we've got with this government is a government that has fuelled inflationary pressures, which means interest rates are higher than they would otherwise be. And
because
will be there
you
for
issued a ton, unwisely, of index-linked gilts, which almost everybody regards as a total mistake.
Because of the decisions that Rachel Reeves took back in the autumn budget, where she talked down the economy, slapped taxes on businesses.
OK, you are ignoring what was a significant mistake made by Rishi Sunak.
To answer your question. OK,
all right.
so
are you going to address the point about index-linked gilts or not?
Well, yeah, about 20-odd% or thereabouts of our national debt is in the form of index gilts. The debt management
Your choice, and that is why the interest bill is higher.
a whole load of different maturities and index links and non-index links and all the rest of it. But the bottom line is that what this government did was slap taxes on businesses, some of which gets passed on by way of higher prices. They borrowed and are spending like it's the 1970s. That is an inflationary pressure. That leaves interest rates higher than before. So she's adding to the debt, 50 billion from the last budget, 30
I should point
from this
out,
one.
you've made your point. We should point out that, for example, interest rates in Germany rising at twice the rate that they've risen here, but there's a ton more we're going to talk about.
Yeah, but that's because they've got rid of the debt break.
Point now. You don't
and they're spending all this money on defence.
You don't have to make that point now because I'm coming back to you in just a moment. Bear with us, so much more exciting stuff to come.
Hello, OK, welcome to the break. We are still talking emojis.
OK.
This is actually like a little game. You have to guess the news story from the string of emojis. OK. Why has he got a moustache? OK, who's this? What's this? What story is this?
Oh, God.
It involves a ginger-haired man.
Being fired from his own charity.
Exactly! You got it. It's Prince Harry Quits Centre Barley charity. Am I saying it right? OK, here we go. This is a good one.
Oh, God. People go to concerts.
I thought no one would get these. She went to Sabrina.
Sorry,
It's selective, isn't it?
OK.
Robert, who said that? I can't see you.
Can you do this one? Yeah, no, suddenly Mel's eyesight's
No,
fine.
I can see a red bar. I can't see the
Putting up pothole.
OK, that
I
is a
can see the
pothole.
dates on your
That is a
graph.
pothole.
Oh, God.
What's going to happen?
Councils will be held accountable for how many potholes they fixed in order to get government money.
I need you on my pub quiz. All right, here we go.
Mary Berry turns 90.
I literally thought no one would get anything. It just shows that I'm just bad at these quizzes. OK, here we go. Oh, this is a good one for you. You should know this.
Phones in schools.
Somebody trying to ban...
All right.
Pushing...
banning phones in school.
Yeah, Kemi Badenoch trying to... I don't know why Kemi Badenoch, but Kemi Badenoch trying to push him. This one.
Ooh, interesting. Snow White.
Yeah.
The other thing I need to mention
film?
is that Trump
Yeah.
just
Is it the film has launched or something?
What's the flop
Has he?
in this?
Green Apple.
That's
I think it's not quite there. Disney's Snow White remake flops at box office.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not surprised.
Okay, we go. This is it, right? Who gets this flag? Whoever gets this flag. Come on, can you guess this?
Football.
But who is this?
Us. Oh,
No,
I don't know.
that's us.
Yeah. Yeah. Going with what I know.
Anyone know the flag?
No idea.
England beats Latvia 3-0 in the World Cup. Okay, here we go. This is an extra hard bonus round.
American.
Some of it's missing, I think.
Is that Greenland?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. I know. They went to a base.
Vance.
They went to a base in Greenland.
When did you know?
To the
Yeah, who
defence
went?
thing.
His wife,
Just now.
Vance,
J.D.
Vance and his wife.
And what happened? The trip will no longer involve
but they
a
went
visit
to
to
a
the
base.
famous...
Huskies.
I'm like the famous dog sled race.
But Huskies.
Could you sum up the spring statement in 3 emojis?
The which one? The
Big statement, what you just heard today.
oh God, there'll be a ship, lots of water and sinking, or
You say ship.
ship.
Do you know what I thought you said?
It's all out of control.
I didn't realise it was that kind of show.
Thank God we're not on live TV, hey?
Tell you what, I'm not coming back.
All right, we're out of time. Keep thinking. We'll talk about it later.
Welcome back. Mel Stride is still with me. You spent quite a lot of your time in government trying to limit the growth of disability and incapacity benefits. So presumably this is one thing that the Chancellor announced today that you support.
I'm quite worried about what they've done, actually, because when I was in office, I carried out what I would call principal welfare reform, which takes time. You have to think very deeply about it and you have to have a clear plan. And you have to be fair both to the taxpayer and getting costs down, and that is an imperative need now. And you have to be fair to some potentially very vulnerable people who need to be supported and looked after.
So your
and this
concern is
government
what?
has failed both tests. Because what it did was it had nothing about, for example, PIP reform in the Labour Party manifesto. It came into office, pussyfooted around this whole area. Why? Because it's deeply divisive within the Labour ranks. And then, when Rachel Reeves turned around and said, help, we've run out of money, they suddenly scurried around at the last minute, pulling any lever in sight to try and save money from welfare. That is not the way that you either get the welfare bill down effectively or do it in a way that properly supports those that need support.
So could
it's
the
been
Tories
botched and rushed.
So could the Tories,
That's
you
the
think,
problem.
vote against this reform? Because it will.
Well, we'll
come
have
a
to
vote.
wait. We'll have to look at the detail. We've only just had the impact assessment, which should have come out when Liz Kendall, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, came before the House of Commons last week with her statement about it. But it's only been released today, many would say, because it's being buried amongst other bad news. So let's have a look at the full impacts and the way that it's being done. But if you want to save money from welfare, and we saved £5 billion when I was Secretary of State, and that, according to the OBR, would have seen 450,000 fewer people going on to long-term sickness.
I'm sorry, and that would have, because obviously the court ruled a big element of what you were proposing
process. It was
illegal.
JR. Yeah, it was JR.
So
And
it wouldn't have been the full six. would it?
Well, no, it was scored by the OBR. The government's response
But they got it wrong.
when the JR went against the process, not the policy itself, the government said that they would still pursue that policy, or at least take the scored savings that the OBR.
But that was $1.5 billion
scored.
wiped out. As you know.
It was at the end of the scorecard. But my point is, there was £5 billion in scored savings there. It's possible to do it, and to do it in a way that is responsible and effective, rather than grasping at things at the last minute, which is what
and then another thing which I'm slightly confused about in terms of your approach and policy, the OBR did give credit to the Chancellor for their planning reform, says it will increase the size of the economy, increase growth.
Yeah.
Are you in favour of their planning reforms?
So there's no doubt that we need to get things built more quickly, and the planning process is part of the reason why that does not happen. But
still not a yes in terms
I
of
was
what
going to
they've
say that any
recommended.
kind of reform in that area does have to take into account the views of local people, as well as simply railroading things through. On the OBR actually scoring that, I think that's an interesting move on the part of the OBR, actually, because it tells me that they're probably taking a different view of those kind of economic interventions.
Which would be a good thing, wouldn't it?
But perhaps becoming more willing to actually score that kind of
because you want any government to take measures which are going to increase
so that's
growth,
why
and you don't want the OBR standing
think,
in the way of that.
That's why I think it's interesting
It's
that
a
they've
good
done
thing.
that.
A good thing.
Potentially so. Yeah.
Anushka, we've had some really significant, some would say very worrying breaking news. Do you want to talk us through it?
Yep. Donald Trump has said the US is going to impose tariffs of 25% on foreign-made auto imports. There's a picture of him talking about it at the moment in the FT, and Faisal Islam of the BBC suggests that there is no exemptions, including the UK. It is one of our major exports there. 18% of UK car exports go to the US.
So, John, that's really worrying, isn't it? I mean, our car manufacturers, I know, have been terrified about this. Many of them will just fall into loss on the basis of this.
It's a big hit. It's a really big hit, yeah.
I'm an MP in Oxford. This is massive. And already we've seen that they had decided that they weren't going to be renewing the new Mini, putting thousands of jobs at risk. I mean, this is serious news for a constituency like mine.
It raises the point as well that was made earlier. We need those conversations that the government's having with the rest of Europe as rapidly as possible now. We've got to deal with this issue on a European basis, not just be picked off one by one.
Do you agree with that, Mel, that actually this is a moment for Europe to stand together in opposition to these tariffs?
So I think it's really important that we try and get a free trade agreement with the United States. Now, the government is engaged.
But what we're hearing tonight is we're not going to get...
This is news.
We're not exempted, Mel.
Well,
we've included
we've only just got, to be fair, we've only all just heard this news. So let's find out.
I think it's fairly straightforward. I agree with you. If we can get a trade deal, fine. It blows a hole in it.
So, John, there are discussions, as I understand it, going on at the moment, which we are told from the mood music may yield some kind of consequential result. So let's wait and see. But to the broader point, what we need to see from this government is whether it's Europe or particularly the United States is getting that kind of deal squared away. And I don't think they got off to a particularly good start with some of the comments that were made about the American administration early on before this government actually came into
Well, it was in opposition,
office.
But actually, let's be clear.
But it was pretty it was a pretty tough start.
Well, hang on a second. It's pretty clear, because I've been observing it actually at short...
Yeah.
Actually, Starmer and Trump have a surprisingly good relationship. And you just talk to any non-aligned official, they will confirm that.
OK, so... look, when Peter Mandelson went out, there was a pretty cold reception to hear. There are all sorts of cross-currents and difficulties that were, I think, of the government's making, particularly when they were in opposition. But setting that
I
one
think many
side,
people would say that actually the problem with the Prime Minister is he's being rather too soft on Trump. But, Zia, your leader is close to Donald Trump. Are you prepared yourself to say that Donald Trump is making a mistake in imposing these very painful tariffs on our car manufacturers?
What I'm prepared to say is that the British government should be sticking up for British citizens in the way that President Trump is doing for his citizens.
So what does that mean,
President Trump was
slapping
very
massive
clear.
tariffs on
President
American
Trump
exports?
had a mandate when he was elected.
So you're
it was going to be about
supporting
America
Trump on this,
first.
are you?
What we focused on.
Trump on this?
Of course not. What we're focused on is what is best for the British people. As the point has already been made.
Are you supporting Trump doing this?
Multiple Labour cabinet ministers
As Farage picked up the phone to Trump.
personally insulted the President of the United States multiple times, which clearly did not bode well for any trade discussions that would then happen. By the way, we're talking about car manufacturers.
Farage picked
we
up the
produce
phone?
far fewer cars today than we did
Yeah,
a year
you're
ago.
not, again, you haven't actually told me. Do you think Trump is... Would you like to ask Donald Trump not to do this?
Of course I would. Of course I would. But let's be clear about something. President Trump is looking out for the citizens of the United States. We need a Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and British politicians and leaders to look out for the citizens of the UK. So what we need to do is revitalise our manufacturing sector.
Are you supporting Trump doing this?
Of course
Are you
not.
supporting Trump doing this?
No, he has said no.
Say so. Well, say so.
Right.
It's more
Well, look, this has been a lively, often informative conversation tonight. That is it, I'm afraid. We all agree with the Chancellor that these are uncertain times. So, if you want to continue to make sense of the chaos, tune in again next week. Goodbye for now.